Alright, so let's get back to my Disney reviews. And the last Disney movies in canon I talked about were the Cinderella films, the first three. And now I'm going to talk about the remake that came out in 2015 that Kenneth Branagh directed, which is a movie that the first time I saw it I really disliked. I thought that it didn't do much to further the story and to make these characters more interesting. But watching it a second time, I really had a different mindset and actually enjoyed it immensely more. There are a couple moments that I would still point out as the review goes on, but for the most part, watching this again a couple years later, this one I really thought was better than what I thought it was the first time. The first thing I'm going to say about this movie is overall, it's a gorgeous looking movie. Like, even if you don't like things about the movie, like, the visuals are fantastic. And of course, it's Kenneth Branagh. He's a person who can make, like, he has such, I don't know what to say, like Shakespearean type cinematography and imagery, like how he perceives how the film looks. They're always so beautiful. Most of his films are always so incredibly gorgeous and just have such a identity to them in the visuals. And I think that that's great with a director like this. And he makes great movies despite even if they've just got beautiful, like if they're beautiful movies, like they've got a lot of great things about them too. And this one, I liked how it started out with, like, how the Beauty and the Beast remake Disney did too is like, where like it's more detailed with the opening. Like, you get more, like, both of these movies do like a storybook type of thing at the beginning where they tell a little bit of the past, but then they don't go too much into them. And this one, like Beauty and the Beast, does that, where you see Cinderella as a kid, Ella as a kid, and she has a father, a mother. Haley Atwell's the mother, and the mother dies. And I like the fact that it starts out very happy and very fairy tale, whimsical like, but then Helena Bonham Carter, who's the fairy godmother in this movie, is narrating it, and she says, like, even like with how great her life is, even in fairy tales, like, there's got to be like something, there's got to be a tragedy. And she says something like that, where I'm paraphrasing, but like, I like how it starts very happy, very whimsical, and then like you get into the real life picture of it, where like her mother dies, and then they get introduced to Lady Tremaine and her daughters Anastasia and Drizella, who the father remarries because she also lost her husband as well. And then it ends up where the father eventually dies, and Cinderella becomes a slave in her own house. But in the way this movie is perceived as opposed to the original animated one, Lady Tremaine, like, they do a great job with Lady Tremaine and Cinderella, and how Lady Tremaine slowly edges her way to make Cinderella a slave. Like, she does it so delicately, to where she pushes her to say, like, oh, you can do this, you can eat after us. Wouldn't you like to eat after all the work is done? Like, she says all these things to Cinderella, or Ella, and she makes it to where she slowly makes her become a slave, and she does. And I liked how you see her edge her way in, and Cate Blanchett was a really great choice for Lady Tremaine. Like, that's a really awesome, because Cate Blanchett is just a great actress, and she really does a great job with this villain. A villain that is one of the most recognizable Disney villains of all of them, Lady Tremaine. And I didn't mention this, but I liked how whenever the mother passed, like, there's this line that's in the movie, or in the trailer and in the movie, where she says, like, have courage and be kind. And I like how this movie perceives Cinderella differently, and there's some things I don't like about that, but I also like that the way her mother perceives, or talks to her before she dies, said, like, life will give you all you need if you are just kind and simple, like, kind and have courage for people. Like, you need to, being a kind person can help you and make you successful in a way. And I guess that's true in a fairy tale way, but in a real life way, I don't know if that always works. But I did like that. I did like how she does have kind of a different personality to her, the Cinderella character in this one, as opposed to the original. I thought that worked, and I thought that really, I don't know, that made it more interesting. And I liked the fact that before the father dies, Cinderella says to him like, she says like, "Do you want anything?" Like Anastasia and Drizella already asked for blah blah blah, like all this other stuff. And then Cinderella, just as the kind person she is, she just says, "Give me the first like leaf that you brush on when you make it to where you're at." Which was a cool, like, it was just a fun, like, whimsical thing for her to say, like, get the first leaf that like you touch when you land in your area. And I like the fact whenever he dies, whenever the guy comes in and tells them the bad news, he gives her the little, I guess it's a little piece of tree, but like whatever he brushed on first, and so she gets that whenever he dies, and that actually is cool because it shows both the parents and how she still has something of them even wherever they go, but it's still incredibly sad. Like, it just works on that level. And the movie does a lot of things different than the animated one, which I don't dislike, but I don't love. Like, I like the fact that even though it's kind of pointless, I liked in the original the animals. We had a lot of fun moments with them, and it was a cartoon, so it made more sense to have them in that. But in this, they're still CG like mice with like a real cat with Lucifer, but they're barely in the movie. They could be like taken out immediately, and nobody would even notice a difference in this movie as opposed to like the original one. And I like the scenes in the original one, but I don't. And they're fine in this, but they're pointless, which isn't like a huge negative. But I'm like, okay, there's not even a point to have the mice or Lucifer, pretty much, except for the mice to help Cinderella when she's alone, but they don't do much in this movie like the original one. Like, they don't make her dress, they don't get her out of the room at the end of the movie, so they're just kind of pointless in this movie more, besides the fact, like I said, that they are there to keep her company. And I like the fact that there was one thing I complained about in the original, even though I think the original is a better movie than this, that the Prince character, like most of the Disney original animated princess movies, were very much so the prince had nothing to him. They weren't trying to make them have any depth to them, and this one they did. Like, the guy, I don't know what's his name, but he's one of the Starks on Game of Thrones, Richard Madden, I think. Richard Madden, he's the prince, and he's really good because this character is more developed. And like I said, it's not as much of a negative in the original because it's more about Cinderella's story, but I like how in this one they both have equal footing more. Like, he has actual lines in this movie. So that's a positive I can give this over the original, but I still like the originals way more, because it still has such a whimsical, genuine feel in the original more than this one. But the characters are more well utilized and realized in this movie than the original. So it's weird, this movie is a great companion piece to the original, but it's very different, but it's very the same. So I do like that these movies are not the same thing. I did enjoy that. I thought that this movie does try to be different. It just, to me, it doesn't always work. Like, for instance, there's a scene in the original where after Cinderella makes her mother's dress, the Anastasia and Drizella like tear her dress apart, and the way it's animated of them lunging at her is creepy and scary in the cartoon version. It looks like an allegory for like her being raped, like, because they grab at her, they lunge at her. Like, it is a really excellently animated scene where her dress is ripped, and then in this movie they literally just go and just rip off an arm of her dress, and then that's it. And I'm like, that doesn't make the same effect of her like in the original, where she, like, her dress is in shambles in the other one. It's like it doesn't work that way in this one. It's just torn. She could fix it, but nope, that's it. So I felt like it was done way better in the original. And then so she, of course, does her scene where she goes out and cries, and like the fairy godmother appears, who is Helena Bonham Carter, which is an interesting choice. And I did like her in this movie. I thought that she was her spunky personality, or her wacky personality that Helena Bonham Carter has, it works in this movie, because she is a likable actress, and she is likable in this movie. Like, she's really fun, and how she acts and how she plays this character. It's different than the animated one. The other one, the fairy godmother, I thought was more like stoic and more like not crazy, but in this one she's way more crazy, and bubbly, which I mean isn't a bad thing. Again, it's changing it, but I feel like I like the original more. But I do appreciate the differences in this one. And then I like whenever she goes to the ball, like she and Kit, instead of having the one song in the original, they have like they have conversations with each other. So it fits in this realistic age more than the animated one, even though I like the animated one more. Because they do have good chemistry in this movie, both of the characters, Cinderella and Kit, the prince. And I thought it was interesting how the father died after the ball, because then it makes it more interesting to how then the prince has to do this himself. Because in the original movie, since the prince had no lines except for singing, it had the king talking to his like assistant guy, talking about how he needs to get married, he needs to find somebody. And then in this one, the prince has actual talks in this movie, and I liked that more. And I liked when the king died, because it actually made the prince have a reasoning to go and do this himself. I thought that was cool, as opposed to him not doing it in the original. Even though, again, I love the original more, I could still say that. And then I love the fact that you get the scene towards the end where whenever Lady Tremaine figures it out, she figures out that Cinderella was the one who danced at the ball. And I like in this movie, as opposed to the original, this is a very different positive that I think is not better than the original, but this one really works, because this gives questions about Lady Tremaine herself. Because in the original, she could just be interpreted as this evil woman who wants, like, fame, and she wants her ugly daughters to, like, become famous, but, like, they're not going to be. Or become rich and marry kings. And in this one, whenever Lady Tremaine figures it out to Cinderella, Cinderella says, like, how could you? And then Lady Tremaine says something like, how could you? Like Lady Tremaine literally lost her husband, she lost her happily ever after, so why should Cinderella get hers? And I thought that actually, like, kind of blew my mind. Like, this villain is actually got, like, she's not just a villain, you got a reason why she's doing this, why she's being so horrible to her. Because she lost her happy ending, she lost her life with happiness, and I thought that actually is one of the biggest positives of this movie, is Lady Tremaine, and how she actually had, like, a good side to her, but she just is so mad about what had happened. Like, she lost her husband, she lost her second husband, Cinderella's father, and then literally is in shambles. She doesn't have anything. So I thought that made a great, greedy villain. And just the writing in that was really interesting. I like that. Even though, of course, the end of the movie, of course, Cinderella gets to fit the slipper, and then it says, the fairy godmother says in the narration at the end, like, Lady Tremaine and Anastasia and Rosella were never allowed in the town again. So she never got her happy ending, but I mean, she was horrible enough to where she shouldn't get it. But I like that they had that difference between her and Cinderella, that conversation about how Lady Tremaine did think, why should Cinderella get this and not me? I like that. That made her a great villain in this movie. And I thought she was amazing in the original movie. So I thought that was great. So overall, this movie I do enjoy the second time around, especially scenes like that. Like, this movie it is a good companion piece to the first one if you want to watch both of them and see the differences, because I feel like there's a lot of positives to both, but I'd prefer the original one over this one. Even though it's less realistic, it's more whimsical, but I feel like it's more genuine, even though this one has a lot of genuine stuff to it too, but I liked everything about the original more. It is a classic in its own right, and this one is a very good remake, and I think that the movie, the positives I can really give it is that it's a beautiful movie. Like I said, Kenneth Branagh, great director, great visual director. Like, he does, all of his movies stand out and pop, and this one definitely does it too. All these characters are fully realized as opposed to the original. Even though I love the original more because it's genuine, like, whimsiness. But this one, I think that they did a good job at updating it to, like, a current audience. And it's not a musical, which, even though I love the music in the first one, this one, it's a positive that it's not a musical. And it's weird that this is not a musical, because Beauty and the Beast, the live-action one, is. And I'm just surprised this one wasn't, because this one, but it still worked really well, and not having a musical made it more interesting, because it was very ballsy to not do that. as opposed to Beauty and the Beast, the remake. So this one, it's cool that it's not a musical, even though I like the music in the original. It tried to do more of that realistic feel, I guess, even though, of course, it's a fairy tale, but I enjoyed it. I thought that rewatching it again, this one's still, like, the first time I watched it, there are a lot of things I disliked about it. There's one thing I did not mention that I do want to bring up that I don't like. One of the biggest things that I did not like about this movie. In the original, Cinderella goes, like, she's trapped in her room whenever the guy comes down to fit the girls for the slipper. And she gets the cats and the birds to get the dog to get out of the attic room that Lady Tremaine locked her in the original. So she's pushing herself to, like, get everybody to get me out of here. And then, like, in this one, Cinderella literally, in the dialogue, fairy godmother says that Cinderella just didn't care who was there anymore because it was the fitter downstairs. She didn't care who it was. She would just stay in the attic and it would become a faint memory like her mom and dad. And I'm thinking, what? Like, in the original, she fought, even though she was stuck in an attic, she fought with the animals to go and save her. But in this movie, it just so happens accidentally that the windows open and she sings, and then the prince hears her and gets in there to have her fitted. But, like, I feel like it's just such a coincidence that she would literally just stay up there forever. Like, in the other one, she fought for it. In this one, she didn't at the very end in that last scene. That's the one scene in the movie that I'm like, nope, I still don't like it. That one scene bothers me a lot. But besides that, like I said, there are negatives about it, but not overly negative stuff. Like I said, that's my least favorite scene in the movie, but it's not terrible. It's just like, oh, I feel like this character isn't as strong as the original one was. But like I said, this movie is very visually beautiful. The characters are fully realized as opposed to the original. It's not a musical, which made it more ballsy to make this movie more different because of that. And I'm surprised, incredibly surprised, that there's not music in this movie. There is in the end credits, but not in the actual film. That's incredibly surprising. So overall, there are things I can complain about in this movie, but I thought, rewatching it again, that this was actually a really solid remake, and I enjoyed it for what it was second time around.